So I'm going to begin that process. So welcome again. Thank you for attending. I'm Rachel Potter. I am currently in Virginia, but I am here to host you on behalf of the ABAI Open Educational Resources Special Interest Group. We have a wonderful guest presenter who I will be introducing shortly for you. The link, I believe, is in the chat for the OER Special Interest Group if you're interested in reading more and joining. I believe we may be the only or one of the few special interest groups that does not have any dues required, because that conflicts a little bit with our mission for free and open access to as much information in our discipline as possible. Today's event does include, for those who stay through the event and who would like it, 1.5 supervision CEs. In order to do that, you're going to be prompted here shortly at the beginning of the session, as well as at the end of the session, to type your first and last name into the chat. If you are able to, and if you can recall what name you registered under, if you could use the same name that you registered with, that would be helpful. You can also send that as a direct chat to me if you prefer not to put it in the group chat. We will also require that you complete the end of session evaluation. We'll provide a link to that evaluation at the end of the session. Part of that will be to provide the documentation that we need so that we can issue you that CE credit documentation. You'll have that within a week. I say within a week, but often I'm a much faster turnaround, so you will probably have that by the end of the weekend. We'll also make sure you have access to these wonderful slides that Dr. Sellers has prepared for us. And our special interest group will have the recording available for later viewing, though not for CE credit. I'm going to, when she begins, have Dr. Sellers share how she would like you to engage and ask questions that aligns best with her preferences as we move forward. So before I introduce our guest today, I would ask that you please now, if you've not already, enter your first and last name into the chat. This is your way of signing in today. So your first and last name as you registered, either into the group chat to everybody or as a direct message to me personally. And I will be making a note of that, and I will prompt you again later to do that as well toward the end of the session. So the OER SIG, I mentioned before, we are absolute proponents of as much free and equitable access to materials in our discipline as possible. So please do make a point of visiting our website and become a member if you'd like. You'd certainly be welcome to do that. We do not require that people be ABAI members in order to be a member of our SIG. That is not a requirement. So we would certainly welcome anyone of interest. So to introduce our guest speaker today, we have Dr. Tyra Sellers with us. She is a BCBAD with multiple degrees, including a PhD as well as a JD. But more importantly, over 2 decades of experience, clinical experience working across age groups in different settings with different kinds of service models, a wide variety of research interests. But today we are especially excited to welcome Dr. Sellers to speak with us through a supervision lens using the Performance Diagnostic Checklist Human Services. And so I would ask again that as you join me in welcoming Dr. Sellers, please remember to check in by typing your first and last name if you have not done so. And Dr. Sellers, the floor is yours. And thank you again for being with us today to share this professional development and ongoing education with us.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction. I'm so appreciative that I get to be here with y'all and have a chance to maybe make some new friends and see some names of people that I recognize. Okie doke. So a couple of things. First, can you all see my slides? Yes, thumbs up. Thank you so much, Veronica. All right, and then let me make sure I get the chat going. Okay. All right, I think I have all of my environmental arrangement contingencies managed. So I'm Tyra. My pronouns are she, her. I'm really excited to be here with you all. For me, it is evening-ish. And today, my youngest child graduated from high school. So also a really exciting day for me. Thank you, Veronica. We will be going out after this for a very delicious meal in Denver. Thank you, everyone. So I tend to like a rowdy crowd, but you all know you best. So engage with the content as is appropriate for you. I will keep an eye on the chat. I'm pretty good at reading the chat. I might pause every once in a while, but we have plenty of time built in for that to read it and answer questions. If I miss something, I am quite sure that Rachel or Veronica will unmute themselves and say, hey, Tyra, you missed something in the chat, and I will get to it. If you are feeling particularly loquacious tonight and brave and you want to unmute yourself and just say, hey, Tyra, I have a question, or what would it look like in this context? Go ahead and do that too. I'm super flexible. Chat or vocal works for me fine. It definitely will be more meaningful the more questions or examples or comments that you all have. And your comments and questions don't even have to be to me. You all can share your own insight, your own examples. We're a community of practice, so support one another. I'll double check, and if it seems like it, it's just people high-fiving each other or sharing resources, I will just say like, I love all of the beautiful support that's happening in the chat. So, the chat is for you all, and then also a way for you to give me some prompts that you need some different information. I also tend to talk real fast. So if you need me to slow down, let me know. Or if you need me to back up so that you can have another minute with the slides, that's totally fine. They are available to you all, or will be. I'm also going to put 2 things in the chat right now. So everybody else also be kind and thoughtful for anyone that joins after I put them in there, because they won't see them. But these will also be made available through the SIG to you all on their space. So what I'm going to give you is the original article that we're going to be talking about tonight, as well as, and you know what? In the title, I may have the year wrong. I think I put 2014. It's entirely possible that it's 2013. A little bit of grace. But I'm also going to give you the end pages of the article extracted. So just the PDC as a tool by itself. So without further ado, we will forge ahead into the presentation. I think. Yes, we are. Okay, before we start, I'm just going to invite everybody, and you don't have to do this if you don't want to. That's totally fine. But we all are busy and we're pulled in a million different directions. And sometimes we forget to just stop and take a deep breath. And it is one thing that we can do that gives us control over some of our neurological, physiological systems that we don't actually really have much control over. And so I'm just going to invite people to take 2 nice breaths along with the image that you see to kind of start us out. I tend to get a little, ramped up like a squirrel. So this is always helpful for me. So what I do, just so you know, is I like to put a hand on my stomach to remind myself that I should be breathing into my stomach. But you don't have to do that. You can put a hand on your chest and your stomach, and then we're going to just go ahead. Okay, now I can move forward. I love these GIFs when I see them. I really like the one that says, oh, it's a meme. It says something like, hey, you, drop your shoulders away from your ears, unclench your jaw, take a breath, right? I need that reminder. So, okay, so most of us probably take a pretty planful and thoughtful approach to training our staff, to engaging in ongoing and active performance monitoring and performance management. And in my 25 plus years experience, I have found that even the best laid plans can go awry for a number of reasons. Sometimes we thought we did a great job with our training, or that we think our culture is strong and it's not. Sometimes issues arise because of contingencies beyond our control, whatever. But what we're going to be talking about tonight is sort of how we can take a structured approach for when those problems do arise. So I'm going to pose some questions throughout. And my question right now to you all is, how many of you have never experienced a staff performance issue? Anybody? Yeah, good reminder. Don't forget to put your first and last name in. So right now, unless it's someone signing in, probably the chat is going to be silent, right? Like all of us. Oh, Brad, that is amazing. But I'm picking up on your sarcasm. Thanks for signing in, Lisa. Hopefully I pronounced that correctly. Also, if I mispronounce anybody's name, just pop in a phonetic spelling and I will do my best to get it right. Right, all of us have experienced, maybe even our own, but staff performance issues. It's just the way the world works. We ask people to do complicated things. Life is hard. People are busy. People have all sorts of learning histories that are complicated. Our environments are complicated. So we know this is going to happen. And if we know it's a given, if we absolutely know it's going to happen, we should position ourselves well to address them when they arise and to teach our trainees and supervisees how to address performance issues. Now, what you see in front of you in this slightly pixelated picture of stormtroopers, wait, are those stormtroopers? Someone can correct me. I don't always get it right. And my kids are always like, oh, that's a blah, 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 blah. So I think I got it right. But, you know, avoiding is a really common supervisory reaction to performance issues. And that can come in forms of responding that maybe to the person, to the supervisor, aren't meant to be avoidant, right? Like, you know what? I think I'm just going to give Rachel some more time to figure it out. Or, you know what? I think that, you know, Veronica was just not feeling well, or, you know, I don't want to hurt Catherine's feelings. So I want to, you know, give them some more space. So it may not feel to us like we're engaging in avoidant responses, but all of those are in effect avoidant responses, which is problematic. Avoiding addressing performance issues has so many potential negative side effects. First, that performance issue is happening, right? Like 100% is happening still, which could mean that there's risk to clients or others. If we're avoiding it, it's also very probable that the problem is just going to not only persist, but get worse. Other people might observe that individual engaging in the problematic behavior and think like, well, they're doing it, I should do that too. So it could effectively sort of infect other people's behavioral repertoires. We're not honoring our responsibility as a supervisor to either the client or the trainee or supervisee by allowing poor performance or dangerous performance, or even just less than optimal or effective performance. So we're not really behaving with integrity or being ethical. And we are robbing ourselves from the opportunity to grow our supervisory repertoires. So not great. We don't want to do that. Now, this is another common supervisor reaction that also is avoidant, and it is clearly and directly avoidant. This comes in the form of, if you're supervising a trainee, you may discharge them. You may end your contract and say, I don't want to supervise you anymore. This could come in the form of maybe not directly saying you don't want to supervise them anymore because of that thing, but making up some other excuse or passing them off to someone else. This also, if it's not just a supervisory trainee relationship, maybe it's like an employment relationship. Maybe this is firing somebody or moving them to a different position. This could even be, and you all are going to gasp when I say this, but those of you that have been around for a while know what I'm talking about, promoting someone into a different position, right? These are all things that happen when there are performance issues and we're hesitant, we're not ready, we're not willing to directly address them. And this is problematic for all of the same reasons that I mentioned before, except for that if you are discharging this person from your supervisory purview, it means also that you are potentially, yes, kicked upstairs. Oh my gosh, that's amazing. You potentially are putting this person in a position where that problem is going to persist in an even greater degree, because maybe their next supervisor or employer isn't well positioned to detect this issue. And so you really could be setting things up for very dire consequences if you don't address issues. And I think this is true even if you are terminating someone either from your supervision or from employment for cause. Like maybe it's reasonable that this separation is happening, but what often happens is that a very open and honest conversation about the performance issue and the risks associated with it and your concerns don't happen, right? Because it's like, I don't have to have this conversation now because HR will take care of firing them or what have you. So all of these responses have very lasting effects when you think about the fact that that person is going to probably continue working in our profession and will keep contacting vulnerable populations and might become a supervisor themselves, which means they will have future trainees and supervisees, who then will have future trainees and supervisees, who then will have future supervisees and trainees. And we have this multiplicative sort of exponential negative impact on our profession that also directly impacts clients and caregivers. And the perception also of our profession. So what we want to do is identify issues early. Dr. Linda LeBlanc likes to say we should always be watching out for smoke, because we all would prefer to, throw a glass of water or stomp on a couple of embers versus battling a raging forest fire, right? So you want to watch for issues arising so that you can catch them early. This is the same principle that we take with our clients. You look for subtle issues early on. It's the same thing we think about when we're thinking about our therapeutic relationship with our caregivers. You want to look for those indicators that a caregiver is distrustful or is unhappy early on. And then you want to address it directly, professionally, compassionately. Don't waste time. Don't engage in avoidance behavior. You have to take that deep breath and value progress over keeping comfort. So that's great, but issues still happen, right? You missed it. You didn't catch it for whatever reason. You inherit an issue. An issue is acute and intense, right? Sometimes there isn't smoke. It just sort of erupts into flames. Or you've been trying to address it and it just isn't getting better using your normal strategies of, feedback and things like that. So that's what we're going to talk about. Any questions at this point? No questions yet.
Yeah,
okay.
I have a quick question, please.
Yes.
How do we do this when we feel that we ourselves are not perfect, because this means a lot of work on our part.
It is a lot of work on our part, and we are not perfect. And the idea isn't to be perfect. The idea is to be effective, right? And that means engaging in behavior, which opens the risk of making mistakes, which means that we're going to need performance feedback. We're going to have to give other people performance feedback. So the idea is to have clear expectations of your staff, to create a culture that is respectful, that is culturally responsive, that makes space for bi-directional feedback, that values everybody equally, regardless of the positions of power, and that takes a view that mistakes are opportunities, And those are ways that you facilitate talking about things regularly. Saying things early on to your trainees, to your supervisees, like, listen, my job is to behave in a way that creates trust, because I'm going to ask you to do hard stuff. And sometimes you're not going to get it right. And my job is to let you know and to discover maybe why. And now sometimes that why is going to be me. I didn't train you well. I didn't develop the materials correctly. I didn't give you the right support. Sometimes the why might be you. You didn't listen. You thought you understood when you didn't. And sometimes the why is going to be us together, but we're going to work together to figure out why and make it better. So I will be giving you frequent feedback, and I'm going to be asking you for frequent feedback. Does that help a little bit?
Yes, that's awesome. Thank you.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Perfect. All right. Well, let me ask you all some questions then. How do you all know that something is a persistent performance problem? Like, what are the things that you are able to tact in your staff, your trainees, your supervisees, that indicate like, oh, this is a persistent issue? And y'all can chat it in, or you can unmute yourselves, whatever you prefer. What are some behavioral indicators? Trainees describe observing others engaging in the behavior. Ah, right. And sort of like, you're hearing that other people are saying this issue is happening. Anyone else? And I know it takes a minute to type stuff in. I typo all the time. I'm sure if I type in the chat, you all will see some. So this is how I've always done it. Yep. Already provided feedback, but the person hasn't implemented that feedback. That's right. Running competency checks allows you to discover that something is a performance issue if you're seeing low scores over time. Absolutely. I love that. Yeah, seeing it with multiple clients, or maybe you're finding out that multiple supervisors are having this issue. Absolutely. Caregivers are making constant complaints, maybe even after you've tried to address it. Perfect. These are all great answers. I love this. Impact on outcomes, deliverables. It's never the therapist that is incorrect. It's always someone else. Absolutely, sort of that, like, it's not my responsibility. Lack of effective leadership can result in gossip in the team. That's absolutely true. Other indicators can be things like, changes in affect or constant call outs or things like that. But everything that you all put in here is perfect. And what Amy just put in is so insightful that folks may not be able to be great self-observers and whether or not they have been able to affect change. So that's because we also had like the indication that you address it, but you don't get the change. And when I am in that situation, I get really frustrated because I think, Amy, I've given you this feedback and I've told you how to do it and I've retrained you and you're not changing anything. But sometimes it's the whole, yeah, or yeah, I totally get that. And then they choose not to do it. But sometimes Amy is doing Amy's darndest to implement the feedback I'm giving, but maybe Amy isn't a great self-observer and thinks that the issue is fixed, but really isn't able to detect that it's not been fixed. So I love that. What are some common persistent performance issues that you all have encountered? Things that have been a little bit resistant to your typical kind of feedback shaping, or that seem to be really common across lots of people. What are some of those pesky repeat things that creep up for you all? This could be clinical things like, not being really engaging with clients, because some people just have trouble with their affect, or inaccurate and not timely note taking. Yeah, converting appointments is like always a big one, right? Poor safety procedures, inconsistently following behavior support plans, missing little details in programs. Yep, absolutely. Trying to get supervisors to provide feedback differently. Oh, I love that, Diana. Trying to get supervisors to individualize the type of feedback that they're giving. That's so great. Over prompting clients. Okay, awesome. These are fantastic. So these can be great examples that you might come back to as we're talking through the rest of the content, thinking about in past experiences, how addressing a performance issue like that went, and how it might go differently if you use the performance diagnostic checklist. And Amy says, for getting resources. I don't even know my own cell phone number half the time. So now I'm going to answer this question for you, although you are welcome to put some things in the chat if you want to, but you don't have to. Some things that I have said and heard about individuals engaging in persistent performance problems are things like they're lazy. They just don't get it. They don't care. They don't value. They think they know everything. I've said some of those things, and I've heard those things said. I think one of the fastest ways to have a behavior analyst begin using mentalistic terms is to present them with staff performance issues. But they have tenure. Yes, that also is a thing, right? Okay, well, here's a common intervention in my in my experience when folks have experienced persistent performance issues. Now, this is just my experience, but often what I see is when an organization or an individual is thinking like, oh, I just haven't moved the needle on this thing yet, they go straight to staff training. Like that's immediately, we need to retrain. We need to provide more training. And I'm here to say that that's not always the case. Now, this is just one study that demonstrates that training isn't always the function matched intervention that staff need. For some context, in this study, this was a large adult provider agency, group homes and day services. And they served a fair number of clients that had some pretty severe problem behavior. The clinical staff had been trained by a university clinic to run trial-based FAs, very high quality training, and then even participated in some subsequent research studies such that they were contacting feedback and support and guidance around running trial-based functional analyses and actually running them for quite a while. But then once the research activities concluded, the staff stopped using trial-based FAs. And the leader of this organization reached out to me. This was about maybe a year and a half after that previous training wrapped up, and said, I want you to come in and do another training, a retraining of all of the staff. And I thought, well, I know who trained them. I saw the quality of the training. I know what went into that. Why do you want to retrain them? Well, because they're not using TBFAs. And I said, I don't know if that's exactly the reason. Are you open to some other considerations? And they were really like, I really think that we want to do the training. And I said, okay, look, we'll do the training, but would you let me then do a little bit of investigation to see if that actually moved the needle? If it did, great, I'm out of your hair. If not, would you still work with me on some other things? They said yes. So we developed the training, we delivered the training. So the second training occurred before baseline. I'm just going to show you a few. Now we do have this guy at the bottom, Tobias, who ran a few in baseline, which great for the clients, but not so great for my experimental control. Well, let's just focus on these three. So we provided the training, and then tracked whether or not they ran trial-based FAs. And, generally speaking, the message in the training was, this is why and when you should run a trial-based FA, but there was no requirement. We did the performance diagnostic checklist with the leaders in the organization, and we identified a number of things, and we put together a package intervention after. So our intervention after baseline was this package intervention that included, sort of like a clear goal or expectation, which was something like every new client with severe problem behavior would receive and we defined it, would receive a trial-based FA, and any client that hadn't realized X percentage reduction in problem behavior over a certain period with their current intervention. And then 15-minute every other week meetings with me just to check in and problem solve. And sometimes they were only 5 minutes. And then I think maybe some incentive, right? So we put together this package. And after the great training, toot my own horn, they weren't running trial-based FAs. We put in this function matched intervention package and everybody began, so this is a cumulative graph, everybody began implementing trial-based FAs under the right conditions. So just a little bit of evidence to suggest that, training is not always the right thing. So we have this approach to treating problem behavior where we attempt to get a handle on the function, what in the environment is supporting this problem behavior or lack of other behavior from happening, really get a handle on it, and then implement a function matched treatment that often means changing the environment to support the more, contextually appropriate behavior, right? So this quote is indicative of that, and effectively was used as the approach to develop the performance diagnostic checklist, the original, that's just like the original flavor. And then we have like extra crispy and extra spicy. There's so many variations on the performance diagnostic checklist now, which is fantastic. So these are some of the core factors that contribute to poor performance in our staff. Things like unclear expectations or ineffective systems. And we know these things from the literature, and we can leverage them in doing an environmental assessment. So the performance diagnostic checklist happened and was great and was used mostly in industry. And the one of the original authors, Dr. Jim Carr, thought, we ought to make a version that is more appropriate for human service setting because the questions weren't quite right in the original tool. So partnered with some other brainiacs and did a great research study and created this really awesome assessment that we're going to talk about today. So let me just ask this. How many people have ever used the performance diagnostic checklist? And if everybody could respond, it would be helpful. No judgment. You could just say yes or no. No, 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 no. And that is totally fine. We have one yes, couple yeses, mostly no's. That's perfect. So for yes, folks, please, and regularly even, I love that. For the yes and the regulars, please feel free to add in your thoughts, your experiences in the chat to support folks that maybe haven't used it. And that is totally fine, those of you that haven't. I'm excited that you're going to learn about it tonight and hopefully consider adopting it not only for your own practice, but in your supervisory practices, that you will teach your trainees how to use this. Gotcha. All right. Well, I already asked that question. It's free, obviously. Duh. That's the whole point of me being here tonight. I'm excited that you're excited, Amy, and thank you for double exclamation points. I am an over exclaimer as well, so I'm here for that. So we're going to walk through a couple of things. First, some science. Right? These are the original data that indicate that the intervention derived from the results of the performance diagnostic checklist were superior to interventions that were not derived. The way that the research usually talks about the intervention is the indicated intervention. In other words, you score the PDCHS, and based on that scoring, it indicates certain types of interventions that are function matched. And then non-indicated is usually the way folks talk about the thing that the PDC results did not point to. So in this instance, this is a university-based clinic with a lot of really amazing, smart, great people. And I believe, they were looking at like keeping the treatment room, organized or what have you, cleaning up. And the indicated intervention based on completing the performance diagnostic checklist for human services was that something related to training and graft feedback would likely be related to the performance issue and produce optimal results, which you can see for rooms A, B, C, D, E, and F, that is in fact what happened, that performance did improve after that intervention was put in place. The non-indicated intervention was put in place initially for 2 rooms, rooms G and H, the 2 bottom legs in this graph. And the reason that the researchers did that is you could make the argument that, well, you have proof that another intervention wouldn't have produced the same results. So that's the reason, a little bit of validation. Does someone have a question?
Where's Mohammed?
Oh, then someone probably wants to know that they're unmuted right now and we can hear you. Just so you know, maybe double check your mutey situation. Awesome, thank you. So they put in the non-indicated intervention. It kind of improved things a little bit for room G, not enough, and it didn't really seem to be like it was going to sustain, didn't improve things for room H. Put in the indicated intervention, bam, got great results. So that was amazing. Now, up to this point in 2018, most of the studies on the PDCHS were done in a university clinic setting with a lot of resources, lots of BCBAs and BCBADs, and arguably simpler performance issues like not keeping the place tidy or not locking the treatment door. This study was run in public preschool classrooms, and it was a master's level graduate student that ran this study and implemented the PDCHS with preschool teachers. So didn't really guide them answering, but sort of facilitated them filling out the performance diagnostic checklist for human services. And the kind of performance issue that was looked at was error correction procedure drift. Like folks were not implementing error correction procedures as they should in discrete trial teaching. So baseline, non-indicated intervention, and then the indicated intervention based on the results of the PDCHS. And this really just indicates that you don't have to be, super highly trained to use this tool and have it be effective. And then this study also added in a little social validity measure for the teachers, basically finding that, they weren't super confident beforehand, but that it was easy to use and that they felt confident after using it. This is what the performance diagnostic checklist for human services looks like. And you have it, and we're going to go through in a little bit more detail, but you'll see that it's broken into 4 main sections. These are sort of the environmental variables that could potentially be supporting or facilitating the problem performance. So areas related to training, task clarification and prompting. So whether or not the individual understands the expectation to do the thing and has any supports in the environment, any stimuli in the environment that would signal do this thing now. Resources, materials, and processes. So as we have all probably heard, if you pit a great performer against a cruddy system, the cruddy system is going to win every time. So this sort of looks at, do they have the right things, and are those things high quality for them to engage in the behavior that you want them to? And then performance consequences, effort, and competition, related to sort of, are they getting the supports on the backside of things to know that they're doing things well, or why, what's the point of doing this thing? What outcome does it produce? Or are there other things that are taking precedent that are even preventing me from getting this thing done? So this article that also is available to you all, it's currently in press. And so two of the original authors on the Performance Diagnostic Checklist Human Services article, and then myself and Dr. Dennis Brand, who has done work in this area, worked together to provide a little bit more guidance for administering the Performance Diagnostic Checklist Human Services. If you read that original article, which you should, because it's a great article, it doesn't give a lot of instruction on how to use the performance diagnostic checklist, other than sort of, it's meant to be kind of done in a collaborative way, and you're going to score it. Oh, thank you so much. So we decided, after having used it a lot and answering questions and seeing how we needed to sort of train folks on how to use it, that we would try to put some of that information into an article. So this is a table that appears in the manuscript that kind of breaks down some of the suggestions or guidance provided. I'm going to highlight some in our talk. So one of the things to think about is, when, and we're going to talk more about the performance diagnostic checklist human services specifically, like, don't worry, we're going to see images of it and walk through it a little bit more. But the first thing we need to think about is, when ought we to use it, or when ought we to expect other people use this? And for me, I think you should ask the question, well, when ought you to use a functional behavior assessment, or expect other people to use a functional behavior assessment with clients? Now, some of us have been doing work around problem behavior for a very long time, and I don't need a template or a checklist to do a functional behavior assessment, to run an FA, even though I still do, because it helps me not drift. But I could walk you through all of the steps right now. Likewise, I can kind of walk you through the steps that I would take in terms of doing a similar functional behavior assessment of a performance issue. But I've been doing this a really, really long time. So the idea, I think, isn't that everybody should always have to use the performance diagnostic checklist for human services all the time. I think it's contextually dependent, right? If you have a new supervisor, I think they should do it for every performance issue, maybe even not persistent ones, just to get fluent with taking a functional behavior approach to evaluating performance issues with their staff. Now, experienced supervisors, maybe you get to the point like me that this is just the way you kind of think and you're so fluent with it. You probably should go back to the tool every once in a while just to evaluate. Maybe over time, I've drifted away from thinking about one component. Now, I also want to use it if I'm in a situation where the things that I typically would do aren't working. And either it's because I drifted, or I maybe just didn't think about something in a structured enough way that led me to identify the contributing variables. The other time I think that a new supervisor and an experienced supervisor should use or either use it themselves or help someone else use it is if there's a risk of bias. Now, the real answer to is there risk of bias or when is there risk of bias is always, right? There's always risk of bias because we're complicated organisms that have data coming in all the time from the minute even before we can see, we have data coming in tactily and auditorily as infants, but our whole lives, we are bombarded with information that often we're not even aware of. And our brain is doing a really, really hard job of trying to make sense and identify patterns. And unfortunately, we're kind of crappy at that. And we don't control a lot of the information we consume. It is so hard out there for a brain for reals. But you know what that leads to? It leads to frames and stimulus equivalents that we didn't intend to develop, but are there. And so we all have it. So we just need to be kind to ourselves and don't beat ourselves up for those kinds of things, but just make space to observe them. That, oh, I'm having a biased thought right now. Yes, that makes me feel bad, but what would make me feel real bad is if I behaved in accordance with it, because that's not cool. So especially if you think that you have a risk of bias, you should use an assessment like this. So the way that I kind of identify this is if I'm sort of, I don't know, kind of pathologizing the performer, like if I'm like, they never, like, this is never going to get better. If I'm having those kinds of thoughts, I'm already at risk for thinking that it's all about them and it's their fault. And I'm missing things in the environment that could be contributing to the performance issue. So here we have the performance diagnostic checklist. Step one is that we have to operationally define the performance problem. This is kind of similar to doing a functional behavior assessment, right? And what we want to do is be behavior analytic, be scientists about this. Don't use our overarching terms like Rachel is unprofessional or Veronica is disorganized. Be specific. If you are going to use these kinds of terms, same if we were going to say tantrum, we would have to define it. What does that mean in this instance? Also, don't pick like a million things. This isn't, the opportunity to go kitchen sink approach. When we're working with our clients, we often will, significantly limit the number of target behaviors that we're addressing. So we want to do that here, be specific, and focus on the things that maybe are mostly related to risk of harm, or maybe not treating clients with dignity and respect, or risk of billing issues, or risk of unethical behavior. What you don't want to do is start listing every single issue. Now, sometimes we have performers who are challenging us, or our environment is arranged such that it is evoking, a plethora of performance issues. I recommend you literally list them and then you rank them based on risk, right? Risk of harm, risk of unethical behavior, whatever. Pick those first. If some of the other ones are functionally related, you're probably going to get some change anyway. If not, you can go back and redo this later. So that's my recommendation there. That's step one. Step two is decide how you're going to implement. Now you have a couple of options. As a supervisor of someone engaging in the performance issue, I probably would complete it myself, right? Or if I'm new to it, I might ask a supervisor to help me complete it. Sometimes we are supervising the person who is supervising the person with a performance issue. In that instance, we would be coaching or supporting that supervisor through completing it. Now, there also is another option, and there's a little bit of data around this, but this would be completing it with the target employee. It's a little more unconventional, but I think this could be great in those instances that we identified earlier. I don't remember who that was. Maybe it was Amy, who was like, sometimes people can't even observe and tact that they're not doing what they need to be doing. Great opportunity. Also, another great opportunity, I think, for individuals who maybe become a little argumentative. because it kind of takes it out of it's my opinion. We're just going through this assessment together. And the questions are so much about the environment that I think it provides a little bit of space for folks that tend to be, because of their learning history, maybe a little bit resistant. So when you are completing it, you typically are interviewing the supervisor and also doing some observations, or you are filling it out yourself and doing some observations. You always want to make sure that you're getting a recent and accurate or representative account of the issue. If anyone has ever done like public school consultation work, you may have had this experience where maybe you've been working with the teacher for a while and you're checking in and they tell you like, oh my God, it's horrible. Nothing is working. Problem behavior is skyrocketing. And you go and you look at the data and you see like, actually things have been pretty great. It's just the last 2 days have sucked, right? So sometimes there's that recency effect. So you want to make sure it's an accurate account. You also want to make sure, to the best of your ability, if it's a supervisor that you're helping, that the issue isn't just between that supervisee and that supervisor, because that could be there's something busted in their relationship, or the supervisor, really the supervisor is the environmental variable that is contributing to the problem. So do a little bit of investigating. Consider any biases that may be coming into play. And if you're supporting a supervisor through using this, you can gently and compassionately invite them to think about, and based on how they're talking about the staff, think about their biases. What stories have they already told themselves about this person that could be getting in the way? And then what's great is if you have permanent products that you can review, whether or not those are documents or videos or what have you. There is an article out there where the employee was interviewed directly to complete it. So you can go to that article and check that out. Okay, step 3. First, I'm gonna get a drink of water. This is just scoring it. Now, items in the document that have an asterisk, that's a really hard word for me to say, y'all. Those should only be answered after you have verified the report from the supervisor by observing the staff. And in some instances, you might actually have to ask the staff a question. And so there's an example in the first section that I will be able to show you for that. So you're going to score items based on, accurate knowledge of the individual, consistent repeated patterns, review available data. Not sure why the word available seems to be in a smaller text font. That's weird. Don't know why I noticed that right now. And then you're interviewing the relevant folks. Some items do require observation, as I mentioned, and a lot of people kind of get hung up on this idea like, is the person going to perform significantly differently? Mostly they don't. You do have some people where you get observer effect. They're so sensitive that they're being watched that they do perform differently. Or like they're so intentional in their performance problems that they know to behave differently when someone is watching. You can try to observe more frequently. You could try to do spot checks where you're just popping in, those sorts of things. Now, you do want to make sure when you or someone else is observing that it's typical working conditions. The person isn't sick, their client isn't sick, because that's not fair, right? So we're going to make sure that we get a standard day. Okay, now you always want to use compassionate, objective, behavioral language, but I think you can coach the use of that when you are going through this with a supervisor. And you can use it as an opportunity to use some behavioral skills training to model and have them practice, and you give them feedback around taking a functional behavioral approach. So the first few times you're training this, tact all of the steps and the rationale for them. Okay, I do want to say that sometimes you have to be flexible with some of the questions depending on the complexity of a performance issue. The questions really are built around more discrete performance tasks, not so much say things like someone who is argumentative or someone who has a flat affect with their clients or something like that. So there are some questions that you may end up having to either really think about or choose to not score. But I will challenge you around the training question, which is the first one. Even if you're thinking about a situation where someone maybe has some issues with their interpersonal skills, don't skip over and say, I'm not going to score the training one because like it's interpersonal skills. No, you absolutely should ask yourself, has the person ever been trained on how to give feedback, receive feedback, be fun? You know, like we all come from different cultures with different learning histories. And if someone is engaging in a certain type of responding, that has been functional for them. And it may be that they may need some specific instruction on how to receive feedback. Don't just assume that that's a skill every human should have. These are all operant skills. They're all response classes that can be shaped up. So don't just automatically skip over those questions just because they might feel a little hard. This is the first section on training, and you can see questions 2 and 4 have an asterisk, indicating that you can't just score these based on information that you have or that the supervisor is giving you. So can the employee accurately describe the target task and when it should be performed? You probably asking the supervisor this, but you want to verify it. So basically you want to go ask the employee, like, hey, describe blah, blah, blah to me. Tell me, when are you supposed to do that? Go gather the information from the individual directly. These are the items for task clarification and prompting, and you can see there also are a couple here where you would need to either go ask or go observe. If you are scoring this with a supervisor, again, it's not that you're distrustful, but often we are not the best reporters of things, and we are biased and are likely to report things in a way that kind of confirms our perceptions. So just make sure you're double checking. This is the section on resources, materials, and processes. Oh, you know what? I want to go back to training really quick. In this first one, I love this question so much because it's not just you're not just off the hook if you say, yes, training was provided. You have to specify, did you give instructions? Did you demonstrate or model? And did you provide rehearsal opportunities with feedback and to a predetermined mastery criteria? Now, obviously, I added in some things that aren't there, but that's what that means, right? Did you implement BST? And a lot of times people will be like, yeah, I trained. And then you get to like, well, did you show them? Did you practice? No. Cool. That's really good information for us to have. Okay, resources, materials, and processes. This sort of gets at, do they have the things that they need and are they well designed for the task? I don't know about you all, but I have written countless programs and created countless data sheets that then result in what I perceive as performance issues. I get irritated. I go observe. I do IOA. I do a procedural integrity check. I think, forget it, I'm just going to try it out myself. Turns out I wrote a CRUDI program. I designed a CRUDI data sheet. So, make sure that you're critically evaluating the actual materials. This section is performance, consequences, effort, and competition. And often when you're doing the interview with the supervisor or the employee, you're going to have more contextual information than it's asking for here. I just usually make notes in the yes, no column or over off to the side. I know this is kind of small, but once you have scored it, any item that you score with a no is indicative of a possible need for intervention in that area. So you're going to go back through and take a look at how you scored things. And this intervention planning rubric sort of, well, it's not a rubric, it's a table. It will, let me stop trying to use a $25 word when it doesn't actually work. It's a table. This will direct you to what appear to be function matched interventions. Now, this article is old now, so there are other resources available to you in the literature, so you may have to do a little bit of searching. And PS, if you happen to be a board certified behavior analyst, you now can access even more journals in your Gateway account. Did you all know that? Yes. Hopefully you saw on social media, I think there were like 6 more added. I don't even remember. Yeah, right. It's awesome. Make sure you share that far and wide, because even before they added, I frequently will ask in trainings and workshops, and so many people don't know, or they're like, I was today old or yesterday old when I found out. Tell people that. Don't assume that they know, because a lot of folks don't. Yes, I'm really excited about that one. And I even asked for an article from a friend because I couldn't get it when I could have actually gone and gotten it, and I was a big jerk. So that's what this section is for. This is for getting you to a function matched intervention. Oh, here's a better, less pixelated and more zoomed in version for you. All right, listen, when you're reviewing and scoring, trying to select your indicated interventions, we already talked about that. You want to give priority to any area, right? We have those 4 main buckets where you have multiple no's. So you might get 1 no in, task clarification, but you get 3 in training. You want to put your focus on training. Also, think temporally. Maybe you got a lot of no's in the task clarification and prompting, but you got a no in training. I think it's reasonable to think that you should address that training need before you do those other things, because temporally you have to be well trained before you can do the thing. Now, you can also combine or sequence interventions across areas. There's no reason you can't put together a package like most of the research that you see using the performance diagnostic checklist for human services implements package interventions, because that's usually what we do, right? If you're not running a research study, who cares if it was this element or that element? The only reason I think that's going to matter is if you've got something like scarcity in terms of resources or what have you, then you might be picking and choosing based on that. So that's that. Let me stop there and ask if there are any questions yet. I mean, it's pretty straightforward, right? Okay, so how should you use the data? Well, when you implement the PDCHS and then choose and design and implement an intervention for a performer or group of performers, because you also can do like the original study you saw, that was across, that wasn't just for a performer, that was across lots of performers, and they basically grouped it like in rooms. So you could also do this like for centers. But once you implement, you want to review regularly to make sure that your intervention was successful for that individual or group of individuals, and modify if needed. You might need to go back because maybe you didn't capture something quite right, you didn't get the right information, or maybe there are multiple functions and you just missed it. So that's using it for a particular individual or group of individuals. Now, the other thing I think that you should do, if you are implementing the PDCHS pretty consistently within your organization or your clinic, you want to review to identify whether or not over time you are seeing the same kind of performance issues pop up, because that's really an indication of a systems level need, right? That's not at the performer level, and it's probably not at the like micro system in terms of like the procedure and the materials. That seems like that's more a systems level issue. Or if you see that training is consistently an issue for a particular performance problem, that's an issue you want to head off from happening again, not by just retraining those people, but by looking at your onboarding training in general. The other thing you can do is aggregate across kind of employees and evaluate over time in your organization or your clinic or what have you. So you can group them so they're kind of anonymized, and then kind of evaluate over time. Are you seeing, like in Q1 or in the first half of the year or in this year, every time, of the times we did the performance diagnostic checklist, it was for this problem, performance problem behavior, or these 5, and these were the most commonly indicated interventions. And as you look in the future, if those same persistent issues are coming up, that's a problem. So it can kind of help you monitor longer term effects. Okay, so this section is about some considerations for training other people on how to use this as a tool. So whether or not you are training trainees that are accruing fieldwork experience hours, you are training already existing BCBAs who just don't know about this tool. Maybe you're training managers or directors of other departments that aren't even behavior analysts, right? Like maybe you're training your scheduling department, the person that manages and oversees the scheduling department, how to use this. Maybe you're training in your IT department, or like whatever. It doesn't matter. It doesn't have to just be for behavior analytics services. Now, there are some uses where you might want to switch to one of the other versions of the PDCHS, depending. But for a lot of the kinds of things that are done within and around AV provider organizations specifically, the PDCHS is a good match. If you're doing things more in OBM, particularly if it's anything related to safety or factory type work or large systems work, there are other versions that are going to be better suited for you. And you can find those probably in the Journal of Organizational Behavior Management. Okay, so when you want to train folks on this, I think a great place to start is to read and review some relevant articles. So you could have a little journal club or something like that. I always recommend reading the original article. I think that it's very well written, and because it is the first article, the first instance of the PDCHS, I know, but you can always message me, Rachel, that I'm kidding. I actually don't have a subscription, but I know people who do. But you want to have them read that original article because it's a really good demonstration of also how to validate tools that are created by using the non-indicated intervention application. So that's a great article. There is, I don't remember if Dave Wilder is the first author. He might not be, but there is a brief literature review on the PDCHS that's out there. So you can definitely grab that one and read it. There are also some, that you might want to read because they're relevant to your organization. So, there are some that we're focusing on very complex verbal behavior type stuff. There are some focusing on adults with intellectual disabilities in job sites. So kind of get familiar with the range and have people read articles that are relevant for them. And then obviously do an in-depth review and discussion of the PDCHS, provide a rationale, walk people through it, and then model it. It's almost like I'm recommending you use behavioral skills training. So apply it to case examples. And I recommend that you use case examples built from those common performance issues that you all talked about. Those are the ones that your trainees and supervisees are likely to come up against. So have people kind of practice what it's like, applying it to a case example, interviewing you for fakes, role play it out. I also think it's really, really great to ask them to, especially if there's someone that has been supervising a while, an existing BCBA. What I frequently do is say, I want you to describe a performance issue in the past And I have them walk me through, okay, how did you know it was a problem? Describe it. What did you do? What was the outcome? And then I have them go through and score the PDCHS. And we usually discover like, oh snap, there were like 2 or 3 things that we probably could have done differently and would have had better outcomes faster if we would have taken this structured approach. So it's really good to kind of do like a retrospective, or like in business, sometimes they call it a postmortem, which is just creepy. And I like that, where you're kind of doing a looking back or after the fact review of a system or a process. And then once you're ready to have them implement it, observe it, like coach them through it. And then you can even have them observe you do it and then debrief, and then you observe them and then debrief, or do a side-by-side where you're doing it at the same time. Just double checking. We're just talking about journal access, which I love so much. Okay, so that first bullet point I already talked about, and then plan to complete it with someone else who is experienced or maybe who knew about the staff performance issue. That's always a good way to get started. And then reflect on the score. So when you go through this and you're having them score based on a past performance issue, really like think about objectively, like, what did you miss? And usually it's our thinking, like we had some biases, or we convinced ourselves that this was the issue when it environmentally really wasn't. So that brings us to the conclusion of my chat about the performance diagnostic checklist for human service. I see you all are putting your first and last names in for CEs. I'm going to put mine in too, but I can't type and talk at the same time. Okay, so we still have some time for questions. Any questions from anyone?
Dr. Sellers, I had one actually. About halfway or so through your slides, you had a table regarding social validity, I think 3 teachers and their sort of self-perceptions, their training and usage of this as an instrument. Can you speak either anecdotally or in terms of research to similar perceptions of people, the employees, who have been the subject of these documents? What feedback has there been after they've gone through this process of their own perceptions of use of this sort of approach, which I imagine for some of them may be very different than prior employment situations?
That's a really, really great question. And I don't know if there's more recent research that has captured that, but to the best of my knowledge, in many instances, the staff with the performance issues may not have ever even known that a structured performance diagnostic checklist for human services was used if they weren't formally interviewed or told. It could have just been described that, you know, we're working on improving this performance issue or what have you. And even in those instances, I don't know that social validity data were captured. Like, for example, in the original article, or even in the article by Melissa Bowe and myself, we could have gotten information. You know what? In fact, I think we did capture information from the preschool staff around the non-indicated and the indicated, but it was kind of more just in debriefing. So I don't know that there are significant data out there that have captured that, you know, that someone knew that was being used, or that they participated in the use of it for their own performance issue or performance concern, and how they felt about it. But I think that's a great question.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anybody else? Any other questions? Well, I hope. Oh, you do. Yes,
I do. I have one.
Okay.
Well, what you're describing in terms of, you know, performance assessment and the analysis of the system to find places where, you know, it's maybe non-optimal to encourage employee performance in a particular way, that feels like a very big shift from the culture that we have in terms of workplaces. And speaking loosely, like the general vibe is like, it's your job, just do it. Right. And if you fail to do it, then that's on the performer for failing to achieve the required outcome. What would you recommend? I mean, aside from just approaching this as, we're behavior analysts, we're all scientists, right? We're still human, and we're steeped in this culture where bootstraps and, autonomy and free will and all of this. What are some of the things that you think are necessary to kind of shift that perspective away from it's an individual performer problem to it's an all of us issue that we have to work on together? Or, training isn't just a thing that's done and yay, it worked, but rather, performance is an ongoing repertoire that we have to be refining and iterating towards a betterness.
Yeah, I mean, that is a really complicated question that you're getting at, because it speaks to things like the culture in an organization, and whether or not people are taking a systems approach where they're designing systems thoughtfully that are then evaluated thoughtfully, whether or not there are even organizational level things like missions and values and things like that can drive performance. So I think I will tell you honestly, for me, having folks use it when they have a performance issue is what makes the light bulb go off, because you can't not be self-reflective then, right? It's like a really serious look in the mirror. You can't point at the performer when you are objectively saying, I did not provide high quality training. You can't point at the performer when you are objectively saying, these materials are not optimal, or I'm asking them to do it in a non-optimal location or under non-optimal conditions. Now that's contingency shaping, right? So I get it. What can we do at the kind of more global level? And for me, really the way I approach it is that our staff are not performing in a vacuum. The same way the individuals that we provide services to don't behave in a vacuum. There's not something in someone's left heel that makes them behave in a certain way. And I don't want to change their left heel. It's the environment that facilitates the behavior, and it's the environment that we need to change. And so I just keep kind of coming back to that, and to the fact that even if it really were in the performer, I can't do anything about that. What I can do is change the environment. And so that's what I'm going to focus on. So I don't know if that helps at all. Diana, it does a little bit. There's a section around kind of motivation, but not necessarily at that level that you're talking about. But the question about do they know why they're supposed to do it? Do they ever see the outcomes for what they do? Those things get at motivation. Like, imagine our BTs that collect all of this data and maybe never see the graphs. And can't read them, haven't been trained to read them and don't understand. Like, you see how this is going up, you did that, you produce that. That gets at an EO. So I hope, Veronica, that answered your question a little bit.
It did, thank you.
Okay, good. Perfect.
Dr. Sellers, thank you so much for being gracious enough to give up your time this evening. I have not been a user of this, but am very excited about it, and certainly very appreciative. Congratulations, as Veronica noted there, for the graduation of your family. That's exciting. And I truly am thankful, and I hope you will join us again, either as a presenter and or as a guest at other CE events that we're offering. We would certainly love to have you. We do have our next event coming up. I will put here in the chat, is on June 8th. I went ahead, we haven't even advertised this yet. So for those of you present today, you get the link before everybody else. But we're doing an event related to public health and how we have interceded and intervened to mitigate COVID on the campus where I work. So they have been gracious enough to have a behavior analyst on our pandemic team. So excited to share that information with you. But again, thank you so much, Dr. Sellers. I'm going to go ahead and stop recording at this point, but certainly if people have some trickling questions, if you have a few more minutes and are open to that, we would welcome you to stay on if you're available. Otherwise, people have been checking out and we're ready to close officially.